Hello, friends of Studio Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it's coffee time. And today we have a special guest who is familiar to everyone, Janice Fiamengo. And we are talking about responses to the coronavirus lockdowns and the plans to reopen some parts of the world. And we're going to touch on a little bit of the medical community's official stance on these things. So, welcome to some of the regulars to the show, and with no further ado, we're going to get straight into it with Janice Fiamengo and lockdown responses. Hey Janice, how are you?
Hey, hi Steve, how are you doing?
Excellent, thanks. I have
Good.
my coffee ready to go to absorb new
Right.
insights. So, the first thing I thought that these three links that Janice brought to my attention, they were from Janice, and we're going to go over the three of them and talk about some stuff that kind of intersect with these ideas or these stories. The first thing we'll do for a backdrop to this whole thing is start out with this released statement from the Cpso, the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, which,
Yes.
as Janice pointed out, just before we got on, you pointed out, Janice, that these similar statements have been issued right across the country, right across Canada. And of
Well, I
course, the
definitely
College
know
of
that there's one
Physicians.
in BC, very similar, and I suspect there are very similar ones in other provinces. And in case any of our viewers don't know, the College of Physicians and Surgeons is the body that is empowered by law to regulate the practice of medicine in the various provinces of Canada. So it's obviously a body that has a lot of clout.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, they have the clout to remove people from practicing medicine, so they're pretty strong, and they cancel a group. They can cancel any physician they want to, I believe, on with grounds, and the
Yeah,
grounds
well,
they're
they
claiming is
clearly, yes. I mean, they clearly state that any doctor who steps out of line and says something that departs from the party line, from the public health orders that were issued, during the pandemic, that doctor can be investigated and can have his or her license to practice removed. So this is a very serious, well, it amounts to a gag order, as we'll see.
okay. So let's read the statement in its. I think it's in pretty much its entirety. It's not very long,
No.
so let's get to the first, and I'll just read this from the top. There have been isolated incidents of physicians using social media to spread blatant misinformation and undermine public health measures meant to protect us all. In response, the college released the statement below. The statement is intended to focus on professional behavior and is not intended to stifle a healthy public debate about how to best address aspects of the pandemic. Rather, our focus is on addressing those arguments that reject scientific evidence and seek to rouse emotions over reason. We continue to recognize the important roles physicians can play by advocating for change in a socially accountable manner. That's a loaded up statement there, and it's really just meant to diffuse legitimate criticism of this letter itself.
Yeah,
This is the
absolutely.
preamble. This is the preamble to the actual statement. But
And it sounds pretty good, Oh, okay, all right. Well, certainly, I think most people would agree with the idea that doctors shouldn't be making statements that don't have scientific evidence to back them up, and that doctors shouldn't be spreading misinformation, and that doctors have a role to play in a robust public debate about how best to respond to this alleged pandemic. But that's not what the rest of the actual statement, when it comes, just is a blatant contradiction of all those sane sounding, reasonable propositions.
which is exactly what almost every time somebody puts this disclaimer up front before what comes after, that disclaimer is really to try and silence people who would legitimately critique the subsequent statement,
Yeah,
which is exactly why they put that in there. So
yeah.
let's read their statement here. Let me switch over. Here we go. This is the Cpso Statement. The college is aware and concerned about the increase of misinformation circulating on social media and other platforms regarding physicians who are publicly contradicting public health orders and recommendations. Physicians hold a unique position of trust with the public and have a professional responsibility to not communicate anti-vaccine, anti-masking, anti-distancing, and anti-lockdown statements and or promoting unsupported, unproven treatments for COVID-19. Wow, wow, and then another wow.
Yeah.
There's nothing scientific about this, and this is a unique position of trust, yes, but to not communicate anti-vaccine, anti-masking, anti-distancing, and anti-lockdown, and at the same time saying that physicians are publicly contradicting public health orders and recommendations. This is to imply that this is a total authoritarian, top-down process that the physicians should shut their brains off and repeat what they're told to repeat.
Yeah. I mean, it is utterly flabbergasting. They are essentially telling doctors that they should go against their primary oath to do no harm. I mean, put aside the massive irony of the fact that the public health orders have themselves been based on no scientific evidence whatsoever, have been self-contradictory, have been draconian, have been ridiculous, and have created all sorts of harm. And yes, and have changed,
It changed from one week to the next.
Mm-hmm. I mean, how could so a doctor who expressed concerns about, let's say, the AstraZeneca vaccine, would that doctor be investigated and disciplined because the doctor's statements contradicted what the public health authority had previously said? Or would the doctor not be disciplined because, in fact, the doctor's expression of concern ended up coinciding with the college's own statement that AstraZeneca needed to be suspended because, for a certain population because of the problems that it was causing? It's just, it's astounding that this kind of a statement would be made at a time when, if you look south, all sorts of states have been wide open, maskless, gathering, people going about their free lives and perfectly healthy, no outbreaks, none of the things that we've been warned against up in Canada, while we continue to be under lockdown and various restrictive measures. It's just astounding. And while, you yourself, of course, have documented all of the various problems, the serious problems that these lockdown measures and stay-at-home orders, et cetera, have caused, the increase in suicide amongst youth, the increase in depression, the increase in substance abuse, all of the problems because of canceled surgeries, all of these things that the public health measures ordered that have caused these problems. And so they're basically telling doctors they can't speak out against any of these issues.
Yeah, and these are well understood, well-known health problems. And the doctors can't, like you just said, they're prohibited from, what they're prohibited from doing, if you read this correctly, is not prohibited from advising for people's health. They're prohibited from contradicting official government orders.
Yeah.
This has absolutely nothing to do with health. Absolutely nothing.
No.
And everything to do with telling the doctors they have to toe the line to the authoritarian tyrants who don't give a crap about your health.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we read the second part of this?
Yeah.
Or second part of this. I think it's the whole thing, but
It is. It's just a very short statement, a 1-minute read, as it said.
Yeah. but a very telling 1-minute read for sure.
Yeah.
Reading from the top. Physicians must not make comments or provide advice that encourages the public to act contrary to public health orders and recommendations. Physicians who put the public at risk may face an investigation by the Cpso and disciplinary action when warranted. When offering opinions, physicians must be guided by the law, regulatory standards, and the Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. The information shared must not be misleading or deceptive and must be supported by available evidence and science. That last sentence implies that the physicians should be advising against the vaccines.
Of course it does, and should be
Because
speaking out in all sorts of ways against these public health orders, which are themselves contrary to scientific evidence. So none of it makes any sense whatsoever, except that it is a very clear warning to doctors. If you say anything, if you answer your patient's questions honestly, you're likely to lose your license.
it's terrible. I'm getting a message in the comments here from Michael that I can't be heard. Is that true out there for folks? If so, confirm that in the comments. I've got everything set up as per normal. But let's carry on, and I'll keep an eye on the comments here as we go. So shall we jump into the next section, which is about bizarre... up my mic a bit. Okay, let me just try that. Okay, I just topped up the microphone a little bit here. Okay, so...
How's that? You sound good to me. Can everybody else hear you?
Yeah. Well, I'll monitor the comments. I upped the mic a little bit, and let's get on to the next section here, which is, this is interestingly bizarre, but it's also a bit revealing about the state of our culture today. Let's just get straight into it here. Dr. Bonnie Henry proposes BC, that's British Columbia, Hug Day in July once COVID-19 restrictions are lifted. And this was printed May 26 of 2021. Let's read a couple of the excerpts from this, and then we can chat about that a little bit. During the update, Henry proposed a provincial hug day in BC, an idea she has been trying to pitch to the Premier for July, once British Columbians are able to safely remove their masks. Safely remove their masks. I don't know, it's so absurdly stupid that it is comical to me in a way, but anyways, let's read on another bit here. Despite there being no official provincial hug day yet, Henry believes that if things continue to go well and provincial steps move forward as planned, we will be able to hug our neighbors again soon. Okay, I'm going to pause here, even though there's more, and let you talk about this, Janice, because this is just beyond Orwellian absurd.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, Dr. Bonnie Henry is an unelected official. She is British Columbia's chief public health officer. So she's the one who has made all of the rules that we've had to follow over the last 14 months. I have to say that she has actually, the rules that she's made for British Columbia, which is the province that I live in now, have not been as draconian, although I think they've been equally irrational, but not as bad as those that have been made in the province of Alberta, which is right next door to me, and the province of Ontario and Quebec, which have been under really brutal lockdowns and stay-at-home orders for months and months, to the extent that people are not able to buy like all sorts of items for sale have been restricted in Ontario. I'm not sure about Quebec and Manitoba. You go into a store and there are whole areas of the store that are roped off for your own safety. And over the past 8 months or so, the brutal suppression, if anybody doesn't know, by police has just been, almost unbelievable. I mean, my feeling overall is just incredulity, as I have witnessed police officers wrestling to the ground a young man who was playing ice hockey with some of his friends outside. That was in Alberta. That contradicted, the gathering rule that you weren't supposed to gather with more than, I forget, 5 people. I mean, the various restrictions have differed between provinces. We've seen women arrested in peaceful protests for outside, for holding a sign that said communism is the real virus. we've seen Christian pastors essentially hogtied and thrown into police vans because they have contravened the public health orders. I don't think any maybe some doctors have in BC. I don't know about that. I mean, not doctors, sorry, pastors. In British Columbia, the Christian churches have been closed for 14 months. Church has been conducted online during that entire period. The damage to lonely and vulnerable individuals from that alone is incalculable, I would think. Of course, there have been incredible double standards. If you're a Palestinian, a pro-Palestinian supporter, you can gather in the thousands and nothing will happen to you. Of course, if you're a BLM supporter, you can march through the streets of Vancouver and Dr. Bonnie Henry will applaud you for exercising your right to peacefully protest and will merely tell you that you should monitor yourself for COVID symptoms. That's what she said last summer, but she has absolutely no time for anyone who wants to gather outside to protest government orders. So, there's so many things one could say about this woman. And now here she is telling us that if we're very, very good children and we do everything that the government is telling us to do, there may come a day in July when she gives us the okay to hug one of our friends or family members.
And the sad thing, Janice, it does imply this incredible totalitarian presumption of their right to be so totalitarian that they can determine if and when you can hug somebody you want to hug. They actually presume that. But even perhaps sadder than that are the number of people who support this level of totalitarianism. Let's have a look at some of them here. And I caught some from Twitter feeds and Twitter responses to this kind of what I find is absurdly, mind-bogglingly Orwellian. But it shows that people, in fact, want to be ruled by Big Sister.
Yeah.
Let's have a look at this. This woman, yay or nay, BC Hug Day. Okay, in July, we could be able to hug our family and friends. And you pointed this out earlier, that there are people whose husbands were dying in emergency from COVID, and they weren't allowed to go in and touch them or say goodbye. As a result. I don't agree with that. What do you think? Ready to hug or not? Some 40% say love hugs, 60% don't touch me. Now, what do they mean by don't touch me? Let's have a look. Bonnie Henry will get a great big hug from the anti-maskers, anti-vaxxer types. So in other words, the people who are against this totalitarian are going to love totalitarianism, are going to love her, and this is supposed to be a snide remark at her. And here's another one.
The main criticism that she has received is that she has not been harsh enough, that her measures have not been totalitarian enough.
And I've got a good tweet to illustrate that exact point you just made there, coming up shortly. And here's this fellow here, with Vincent Weiss or whatever. We need to get better at consent as a society first before there's a BC Hug Day. Consent. There's some deep feminist crap.
Yeah.
Not that I'm against consent. It's the feminist version of it that they push at us as if we aren't already practicing consent in general. We are. We always have been, all of my life, before feminists came around to browbeat us about it. And those of us with pre-existing mental health issues before COVID are going to have COVID PTSD for a long time, setting himself up as a victim to be victim rewarded forever due to COVID. Don't touch me. When are we going to get mental health support in this province? Wow, I have to say, leftism, like you pointed out years ago in one of the Femenga files, is a mental disorder.
Yeah.
This is just pointing.
I mean, and
out.
she did say, like, to defend Bonnie Henry from this type of criticism, she actually did say in her statement about BC Hug Day that she knew that not everyone likes to be hugged. And so, of course, this was only for those who wished to be hugged, and consent would have to be asked and freely given, etc., which I thought was ridiculous. But apparently even to propose a hug day goes too far for those who see themselves as traumatized and requiring constant protection. And then there's never a suggestion that the trauma itself has perhaps been caused, or has certainly been caused, by the response of our public health authorities and our politicians and our media, which have been whipping up fear for over 14 months by showing us horrific images and telling us every day, giving us the death count every single day, never providing us with any kind of context about the fact that people do die on a daily basis in a regular year, never giving us any context about why those people have died, whether they had underlying health issues, whether they were 85 years old or whatever it happened to be. There's no recognition of that. There's just a demand that I want to be protected even more than I have been protected so far. And the measures have not gone nearly far enough for many people in Canada, it seems. I mean, if this were a massive experiment to discover how far most Canadians would not only willingly and enthusiastically go, but go and cry out for more and demand more and be angry when restrictions were lifted. If it were an experiment in that, it's certainly been a very revealing and successful one, showing that the vast majority of Canadians want to live like this always. They'd be quite happy to be told that these restrictions are going to stay in place for years to come, and they may well.
And this is exactly in line with behavior theory. I mean, crying victim and telling people how horrible it is and virtue signaling is rewarded. It's rewarded over and over and over again. And if you try to downplay the seriousness of this, or even put some perspective to it, you are canceled, you're kicked off of social media, you're silenced, you're criticized, so you're punished severely. So it's kind of what we should expect in a way. But I agree with you 100% that the authorities are making the most of it to grasp at ever increasing levels and unprecedented levels of power in government. Mm-hmm. Incredible. Yeah. Let's read a couple of more of these things. Justin McElroy, we are all excited for summer hangs, but let's remember the little trauma landmines built up from the last 14 months that are going to set off at random moments and give people the space and support they need. All right, sure. We do have an especially fragile generation here, it seems. Landmines are everywhere. Beware, beware, beware. Yeah. And this from a doctor or something or other. Okay, this is my latest conspiracy theory. I think BC Hug Day is an elaborate plot from Dr. Henry and Minister Adrian Dix to reappropriate hugs from the Hugs Over Masks people. I love it, and I hope that's what it is. Either way, only my grandma is getting hugs.
Yeah, those nasty Hugs Over Mask people. And of course, the Hugs Over Mask people, that's the moniker adopted by the pro-freedom groups in British Columbia that have gathered fairly regularly in small numbers to protest all of the various restrictions. Hugs Over Masks was their statement of preferring freedom of choice, freedom of movement, freedom of association, the freedom to see other people, to see their faces, and to see their expressions. Oh, what terrible, terrible people. And of course, these people have been demonized from the top down as far-right extremists who don't care about people who die, and in fact want people to die. The leader of the NDP, the New Democratic Party, which is the leftist party in Canada, for anybody who doesn't know, Jagmeet Singh, made a very explicit statement that those people who didn't want to wear masks and wanted to go about their ordinary lives without all of these irrational restrictions, that those people were dangerous people. They were associated with the far right. They were hateful people. They rejected the Canadian ethic of caring about the community. And they should be shunned from polite society. So that this person obviously agrees with that. I mean, that has been the most remarkable feature of the whole pandemic, in my opinion, has been the willingness of people to be told whom they should hate. Right from the very beginning, it's been clear that anybody who dissents, anybody who raises questions about the orders that we've been given must be a terrible, dangerous person and should be hated, should be excluded from the community of the just. And of course, certain people are to be loved. And the nurses, for one, whom we are to all celebrate. And I knew it. And I mean, and the somewhat startling, but perhaps not particularly startling thing is that it hasn't made any difference whether the provincial leader is a leftist or a so-called conservative. The conservative leaders have been at least as harsh and draconian as the center-left leaders. Ontario's Premier Ford, who was elected as a conservative, who was going to open the province to business and undo much of what the left-leaning premier had done before him. There was a small protest in Toronto sometime last spring, I think it was, by business owners talking about the damage that was being done to their livelihoods by lockdowns. And he right away called them yahoos, dismissed them, was contemptuous of them. And he had clearly been given his marching orders that he was to show contempt, even though the people who were protesting were the very people who had elected him into office. They were conservatives, small business owners, pro-freedom advocates, and he just dismissed them. And, that's been the way it's been ever since.
Yeah, I like the way you put that there. He's been giving his marching orders to promote hatred against people who question the narrative that's being pushed out, and this is going on all around the Western world. Yeah, it's not just to Canada. We're more familiar with it because we pay so much attention to Canada. But there's this spreading or encouraging of hatred on that basis. Shall we have a look at another one here?
Sure.
Oh, just by the way, this guy's virtue signals at the end. Either way, only my grandma, BFF, is getting hugs. Well, I guess he doesn't mind transmitting the coronavirus to his grandma.
I know. I'm surprised he would say that. Doesn't he care about his grandma?
There's nothing but contradictions in this whole crowd. Jagmeet Singh himself was seen on multiple occasions and photographed hugging other people in public without a mask. And with his buddies without a mask too. So there's nothing but hypocrisy and from the whole group anyways. And here, agree or disagree, this is Kevin Olenek with Bonnie Henry is fine. Just remember, she worked long hours. She had threats on her life. Her family had threats on her life. She faced a lot of criticism, some fair, some not. She deserves admiration and earned the tears she is sharing right now. This we're going to talk about in a second, too. You have something to say about that statement, Janice?
Well, what can you say? This is a woman who I think makes $360,000 a year, deciding which businesses are essential and whether children are allowed to go to school and whether universities should open and all these sorts of things. She has been adulated. She's been admired. There's a public mural that's been painted for her. Somebody wrote a song in her honor. I mean, there's a huge Bonnie Henry fan club. And that is one of her trademarks, is her ability to tear up on cue, and for her voice to go all soft and wavery to show us how deeply, deeply she cares about us. And she's managed through this period of great self-sacrifice on her part to write a book in which she portrays herself as a wonderful heroine, suffering for the good of us all. And and it works. Obviously,
stuff,
it doesn't
eh?
work on me, but yeah, she's very good at crying in public and demonstrating her deep compassion.
And we're going to see in a minute, I've got a couple of clips on this, that this showing of emotion now is promoted by not counseling, but rather consultant groups as a persuasive, powerful persuasive tool for people in power today. So we'll get a little bit of insight on that shortly. But here's another couple of tweets showing the virtue signaling and whatnot. Saw a tweet that said something like, "Can't wait to say on my dating profiles that I'm fully vaccinated like an adoptable dog." Well, that's all I can think about now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here, Sandy Garosino, literally crying she is. "Thank you to all the people of Prince Rupert. You raised the lantern so the rest of us could find our way. 0 cases, Prince Rupert." Literally crying. Crying is becoming now a signal of virtue. If you cry in public, it is now a signal of virtue.
Interesting, though, that the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario had instructed that there shouldn't.
Sorry, you've locked up, Janice. I'm not hearing you. Folks in the comments, are you hearing Janice? I'm not hearing anything here. So I will go back to the first screen here and go on forward in case until Janice gets back. You folks in BC have been lucky to have Dr. Henry, says Tom Parkin. Fighting through the tears, Dr. Bonnie Henry, this is an important day and one we have been waiting for a long time. Fighting through the tears. There are so many references to crying and tearing up right now that it has clearly become a virtue signal in the public eye. Let me see, I think Janice is back on here. Hi, Janice, you're back.
Sorry about that. I somehow lost connection. I don't know if you heard me say that I thought it was ironic that after the College of Physicians and Surgeons had advised doctors that they should not elevate emotion over fact and scientific evidence in their communications with the public, we now see that, this is precisely how the top doctor in the province manages to communicate with people.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just her. This is spreading right around Canada for sure. I don't know if it's contaminated the US as much, but certainly crying victim has contaminated the entire Western world, as we saw with AOC. Holy crap. Anyways, this is coming, an article came up May 5th, 2020, just around after the start of this pandemic. Now showing emotion no longer taboo for political leaders during pandemic. This is from CTV News. Yeah. Let's read a little section of that. Toronto. As the COVID-19 pandemic sweeps through almost every corner of the globe, political leaders and public figures are showing something unusual, visible emotion. Yeah, authentic too, I'm sure.
I'm sure, yeah.
As general thinking goes in public relations strategy, authenticity is king. And experts in that field, they say
incredible.
This stuff with a straight face, eh?
Yeah, authenticity. So make sure you show your authenticity. Have a strategy. Have a plan.
Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. And experts in that field believe being honest and real about the new reality of the world is facing will go a lot further in making sure authorities' messaging lands in an effective way. How authentic is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just incredible. Yeah.
In your approach to authenticity, make sure you're anything but authentic.
Yeah,
and
make
get
sure
your message across.
Yeah, you get your message across in the most effective way.
Even if it means faking that authenticity.
Yeah. I mean, wow. I mean, and this is nonsense too, because of course, effective public leaders have often used emotion in authentic ways, in order that's why we have a word like demagoguery. This is our current leader of Canada, Justin Trudeau, sprang to public notice at his father's funeral with a very carefully scripted display of emotion in which he actually draped himself over his father's coffin.
That wasn't planned, right?
Yeah,
From a drama teacher.
From a drama teacher, exactly. So, this is it's been a very effective political strategy for a very long time. And now I guess we'll see even more of it. And of course, it's also a feminine strategy. I mean, it speaks to the feminization of our public culture, which we've been observing for years now. And this is something that women like to see. Women respond to public displays of emotion. Women themselves sometimes.
And men from women. Like everybody responds to these tears from women, but generally from men, no, it's generally like, oh, who is this?
It's a risky strategy. Yeah, it's a risky strategy for a man, unless you're Justin Trudeau or someone of that ilk. But and it certainly does.
With nice hair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but and it is. I mean, it's. I have thought often of the startling fact, or the not particularly surprising fact, that many of the chief public health officers in Canada are women. Those women have been put in those roles precisely so that they can display their compassion in a so-called authentic way, and that has gone a long way to swaying public opinion towards them and towards compliance with them. And anybody who objects is seen as someone who doesn't have a heart, who doesn't feel for his fellow Canadians.
Yeah, exactly. I've got one more quote from that article, and this I think is a good one as well. It's really important that the leader matches the moment. Laura Babcock, the president of Power Group Communications. This is one of these consultancy groups who teaches all these people who face the public how to present themselves to the public. They told ctvnews.ca in a phone interview from Hamilton, it's really important for leaders to connect with people like they haven't before in the past, share past experiences, and show vulnerability. That's how they think. That's what they think authenticity is.
Yeah.
It's all fake.
Yeah. Yeah. It shows the attitude towards people, that we are simply to be manipulated through these emotional displays. And the worrying thing, of course, is that it works. Yeah. It seems to work with an overwhelming majority, certainly of my fellow Canadians.
And feelings of, for instance, anger or feelings of wanting to protect your freedoms and rights, or feelings of joy for rejecting the domination of the authoritarians, these authentic feelings are to be despised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're reinterpreted as antisocial, as hateful, as being uncaring.
Incredible, eh?
Yeah.
The next section we have here, Janice, is actually related to the rollout coming at BC, and Janice brought this to my attention a couple of days ago, and so we have some clips on this. And at first, before we get into the actual one of the articles talking about the rollout being the rollout of putting your freedoms, so to speak, if we ever get to that part of it. But here is a tweet from Tyler C. Noble. Bonnie, please police or restrict restaurants. Please take away our freedoms.
Yeah.
Every day I see them as a substitute for homes, birthday parties and gatherings. The horror, can you imagine that? Birthday parties and gatherings with your kids who you're implied you should not celebrate your birthdays. Mm-hmm. Business owners are not policing or enforcing.
Yeah.
This is a frighteningly common sentiment in our culture, and it's frighteningly reminiscent of people who supported previous tyrannical regimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, as you said, it's very representative of the mood of a large swath, certainly of my country. Please, please keep us safe. And if you
Yeah.
don't, I'm going to be very, very angry. The willingness to give over all power to supposedly benevolent authorities who are going to keep us safe, it's the dominant feature of the Canadian response to the pandemic, and it's striking. I mean,
Saucy.
about 6 months ago, I went back and read the journals of L.M. Montgomery, the beloved Canadian author of Anne of Green Gables and many other books for young people. And she lived through the Spanish flu of 1918 and 1919. And she writes, it was like she kept a diary that she hoped, with increasing reason to hope, would be published after she died. And by the time she was writing about the Spanish flu, she was a very financially successful and internationally acclaimed writer. And so she was writing this public record in a sense, although it was her private journal at the time. She speaks extensively about her response and her community response to the flu. She was living at the time in a small town in Ontario, about 50 miles northeast of Toronto. And it's so amazing to read her journals, because there is none of the moral panic that we have experienced, even though the Spanish flu was far more devastating than COVID. It killed many more Canadians at a time when the Canadian population was, I think, 8.5 million people. At least 50,000 people died from the Spanish flu. It didn't only strike the very elderly and immune compromised. It killed young people in the prime of their life. It killed children. I mean, it was quite terrifying. It often killed with appalling speed. You could be sick one day and dead the next. And she lost many people close to her, cousins, her best friend. I mean, she knew a number of people, which I don't think many of us can say about deaths from COVID. I often wonder, if nobody had ever told us about COVID, would most of us have even noticed that anything was going on? I really don't know. But certainly it impacted her on a very personal level. And yet there's none of the policing of neighbors. There's none of this cry to be made safe. There's none of this angry certainty that if only the schools had been closed, or if only people had been kept away, or if only businesses had been closed, this person wouldn't have sickened and died. It was just a completely different attitude. And although some of the same public measures were used during the Spanish flu, like there was masking to a certain extent. Certainly the people who were ill were indeed quarantined, but there was travel still between the United States and Canada. She traveled to Boston on numerous occasions to conduct business. Church services went on. They were never stopped. Her oldest boy started school in 1919. And there was none of that sense of policing your neighbors and criticizing your neighbors because they failed to show the appropriate moral rectitude about the virus. Like, it was such a completely different response. And I think it really shows up, the paranoid desire for safety, the overwhelming demand to be kept safe, that has become a part of Canadian and other places too, culture.
This kind of put me in mind of what you said earlier, the feminization of our culture and the feminist takeover of Western world. And the typical female, that's a typical female thing, to insist upon being made safe.
Yeah.
It's not a male. When a culture or a group insists upon being safe, they expect the males to do the work of making it safe.
Yeah.
So it's in line with your idea that our culture has been horrifically feminized.
Yeah. I mean, last summer, I'm wondering if it's going to happen again this summer, but last summer on our boardwalk along the Fraser River, where my husband and I walk every time we can, there was a little part of the path that narrowed somewhat so that it was impossible to maintain the 2-meter distance. And this is a tiny little, it's about maybe 30 feet long. Like you pass people in a split second, and there are never more than a few people in this narrowed area at a time. But they actually, the municipal authorities set up a monitor there to tell us when we could go through this narrowed part of the path. And everybody obeyed. And I mean, it was just incredible to see people waiting till they could walk through, until the monitor said, yes,
And this
you
is
can go
outdoors,
now.
right? This
This is outdoors. It was already made clear, even by Dr. Bonnie Henry, that the chances of contracting the virus outdoors from passing somebody, you know, in the split second that you pass somebody, were infinitesimally small.
Indeed,
but
they are.
you know, still everybody was there thanking the monitors, and, you know, rigidly holding themselves at attention until they could walk through. I mean, the pleasure.
Nobody said F off and just walked through. Not one person.
No, I think a couple young people on skateboards did, but very, very few did overall. Now they so far have not set up a monitor again, but there is a big sign placed there, a big placard that tells you that you are to go to the right so that you don't pass too close. And as the other day, as we passed, my husband, who walks with a cane sometimes when his knee is bothering him, he took his cane and just jabbed at the sign. And, you know, it's one of those big, I don't know what they're called, sandwich boards, I guess. And he just jabbed at it with his cane because it irritates us so much every time we pass it. And, you know, it says, be safe, be kind, you know, be whatever. And he did that. He didn't knock it over even. Like, I have a deep desire to go out there one night and just throw it into the river. I would love that so much.
Get it on video. I want to see that on video.
Are you kidding? I'm not going to take public responsibility for that. I'd probably be thrown in prison. Yeah. I don't think it would be a meaningful enough public intervention in our time to go to prison over. So anyway, so he did that. And this woman there's a little playground right after you come through this narrowed path area. There was an elderly woman with her grandchild in the little park there. And she, if looks could kill, she gave my husband a look of absolute rage. If she could have struck him dead for doing that, she would have done it. And it just, to me, and she held, like, I met her eyes, and I could, you know, it was very clearly indicated that she was outraged that my husband had the temerity and the anti-civic mindedness to have hammered on this sign with his cane. How dare he? I held her gaze. I smiled and laughed. And I said to David, whoa, this woman is really upset at you. How dare you show your disobedience towards the public authorities who are keeping us all safe? And she kept glaring. She was furious. She was unashamed. And if she could have struck him dead, I am sure she would have. And that's the thing that has been so creepy amidst all the expressions of love. And being Canadian is caring about people, and being civic minded is the deep hatred through it all. And I'm really worried. I mean, as we go to talk about the reopening, the issue is that, you know, it's all being tied to case numbers going down, which we know is problematic because we know that the test is really problematic. It's being tied to hospitalizations going down, and it's being tied to people getting their vaccine. And I have a fear that if not enough people take the so-called vaccine, which I am certainly not planning to take, that there is going to be a wave of public fury over those people who will clearly be seen to be holding everybody back and preventing us all from returning to normal life. Never mind that there are all sorts of reports about the adverse health consequences of taking the jab. Never mind that, you know, and I'm afraid of what the response might be if a long summer drags along in which we do not hit the various targets and our freedoms are not given back to us. I'm worried that there'll be public mobbings, calls for the vaccination to be made mandatory. There's already a growing sentiment that that the vaccine should be made mandatory in Canada. I think close to 50%. I saw a poll saying 42% of people already think that. So you can imagine that with just a little bit of propaganda and massaging of perception, that could easily become a significant majority of people demanding that people be forced to take the vaccine, or if not forced, certainly put in situations where their lives become essentially impossible unless they agree. So, that's the public mood here, and I find it really ugly.
No, it is terrible. It is terrible. And you raise a concern here. I think you're the first person to really put it quite so well, is that the mob mentality rising to accuse those who stand against this totalitarianism of being the reason why they can't have their life back.
Yeah.
That could turn murderous for sure.
It could, absolutely.
I could see that turn murderous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and on top of the, there's a thing I had out here. I'm going to just pop this up on the screen for you here. Because I was going to talk about this yesterday, but it falls in line with what you're talking about. Here's this person's scary mommy who says that, who's highlighting these vaccinated jewelry is a thing because we want people to know we're not a-holes. Mm-hmm. This ties into exactly what you're saying, and this is a sentiment that's already started. What you're exactly talking about, Janice, it's already started. You've got to signal your virtue in this, and get this one here. Just take a look at this one. People are getting tattoos to display their vaccination status. So it's not a long stretch to say that you may be expected to prove your vaccination status even if these vaccine passports are defeated. People will still, and if you've ever said something on social media against this nonsense, then you will be a target for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My hope is that eventually, the virus will eventually go away unless the vaccine produces more and more variants, which I've read a little bit that it might possibly do that. My hope is that certainly, reading about Montgomery's experience of the Spanish flu, it went away. And so my hope is that it will go away, and eventually all of this public anger and paranoia and the fury at dissidents will also ebb off. But my fear is
I'm
that
not so confident about that.
Yeah, I'm not either. But my fear is that if sickness continues over the summer, perhaps caused by the vaccines, well, will that even be admitted? Or will we be forced more and more to take these untested substances? Will all sorts of forms of normal life be tied to the vaccine if I'm unable to get insurance, for example, or unable to renew my passport? Travel. Unless I that's a big concern of mine.
They've been talking about this. They've been talking about this, all this stuff since the very beginning. This is a weird thing to me, that even when they first started the 2 weeks to flatten the curve, they were talking about all of these things, implementing them.
Yeah, they were.
So I have a feeling that the people in power, especially the pharmaceutical oligarchs, there's 9 new billionaires as a result of this year, a direct result of vaccines. There is something like an increase in wealth from the wealthiest in the order of $3.7 trillion in total, new increased wealth, to a loss of wealth amongst the regular people of about $3.7 trillion. I may be a little bit off on these numbers, but it's in the multiple trillions. So there's been, this last year has been by far the largest wealth transfer from regular people, the poor, struggling, working people, to the ultra wealthy. It's been the largest single wealth transfer in human history. And my thinking in this, Janice, on your lines, is that They love this, and they are not going to let it go away. They want to continue to transfer the wealth through your taxation. You know, the vehicle is not hard to see. The mechanism is not hard to see. You know, you pay taxes when you work. Those tax dollars go to buy vaccines and all these health crap and to promote the fear. And then the vaccine profits go straight into the already ultra wealthy. Mm-hmm. What are the chances that they're going to let that gravy train just stop?
They won't do it willingly. That's likely very true. We're already hearing that there will need to be top-up vaccines and, you know, secondary and tertiary and whatever, into the foreseeable future because of all the variants. So we've already seen the ways in which it's being guaranteed that this will continue. And certainly the willingness of many, many people to go along with it, to allow themselves to be experimented upon, you know, to beg for it and to viciously attack anyone who doesn't wish to go along. I had somebody dogging me on Twitter for months, like way back in the late summer and early fall when the vaccine was just an idea. Constantly asking me, you know, whether I was going to be vaccinated, and the anger that was already in preparation then at anybody who dissented was really very worrisome. Anyway, so I should probably get going, Steve. I know we had more things we were going to talk about, but I've got to do something just after 11. So
okay, so maybe, I'll let you go, and I'll just cover a few more of the comments in this article for our viewers. And thanks for joining me again, Janice. And we're going to make this a regular event, right?
Would love to.
Do a live stream chat. You. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much for coming.
Bye.
See ya.
See ya.
Okay, folks. So I'm going to just touch on a couple of the other clips from that article. Here, the first steps come into effect on Tuesday. This is for the reopening of British Columbia, and I suspect this kind of thing is happening right around the Western world. A maximum of 5 visitors or one household are allowed for indoor personal gatherings, and a maximum of 10 people can gather outdoors. Wow, the boldness of telling people whether they can gather with 5 visitors. That's just a regular family size right there. But this is a plan for their reopening of British Columbia. Indoor and outdoor dining for up to 6 people is allowed with safety protocols in place. Sports organizations can resume outdoor sports games for adults and kids with no spectators in attendance. How on earth is it more risky for spectators to be in attendance at an outdoor sport event? It's insanity. Low-intensity fitness with safety protocols in place can also resume. And reading onwards, a maximum of 10 people are allowed for seated indoor organized gatherings with safety protocols in place, and a maximum of 50 people. This is like stage 2 or stage 3 here at this point. Each of these are different stages of their reopening that happen over a period of months. A maximum of 50 people are permitted for seated outdoor organized gatherings with safety protocols. Indoor, in-person, faith-based gatherings can return at reduced capacity based on consultation with public health. And again, this is, I think, step 3 or so in their program. The province is only allowing recreational travel within travel regions. That's within the province. So you're not allowed to travel within BC except within certain regions. Well, maybe that was all first step. Sorry about that. Here, the second step in the restart is planned for June 15th at the earliest, as Janice pointed out. Once 65% of the adult population has received 1 dose of COVID-19 vaccine and cases and hospitalizations continue to decline. In other words, this is pressure to vaccinate yourself. This will also be the incentive for people to vilify and attack those who dissent against vaccines. Step 2 includes outdoor social gatherings with a maximum of 50 indoor organized such as banquet halls, movie theaters, and live theater can have a maximum of 50 people with safety protocols in place. In step 2, travel restrictions within BC will be lifted and people will be encouraged to travel across the province. This phase also includes indoor sports, games, and high-intensity fitness with safety protocols and up to 50 spectators for outdoor sports. The province-wide mask mandate, business safety protocols, and physical distancing measures will remain in place. The earliest possible switch to third step of the restart is July 1st. The switch will take place if 70% of the adult population has received one dose of COVID-19 vaccine and cases and hospitalizations remain low. At this point, the province anticipates lifting the state of emergency and public health emergency. This entire process is generally applauded by the virtue signaling left in the West, that's British Columbia. Reading from the top, this will mean a return to normal for indoor and outdoor personal gatherings and increased capacity for indoor and outdoor organized gatherings with safety measures in place. Bingo, nightclubs, casinos can reopen at limited capacity with safety plans in place. Safety is a big theme here. There could be new guidance around personal protective equipment, physical distancing, and business protocols, the province said. So they are saying that they retain the power to put additional requirements on the public. The province is looking at fairs and festivals and inviting people from outside the province. There will be no group limits on dining at this point as well. This is when I'm hoping to get rid of the public health orders that are in place, said Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry. The fourth and final step could come into effect on September 7th at the earliest, if more than 70% of adults have received at least one dose of vaccine and case numbers and hospitalizations remain low. September 7th is Labor Day here. That's the return to school in the old world, in the old normal. And it's also the end of summer, generally the end of the travel season, the end of the outdoor restaurant season, and the beginning of the flu season. So here we have it. They plan to have the final step of opening to so-called normal again, which I don't believe they're ever going to get back to. And what it includes is the beginning of the next flu season, which we will see them propping up new forms of this virus, insisting on new vaccines, and I'll predict right now that we will have new health measures put in place, new forms of the lockdowns. This is way too much power. The elite and the powerful have no intention of giving up their totalitarian power at the end of this, if there is ever an end of this. Reading from the top. Today is a new day. We are one day closer to the light as we move into the last phase of our pandemic, we hope, Henry said. This is a careful 4-step plan that brings us back to normal. Don't count on it, folks. There's far too much money and power at stake for them to ever let you forget that your safety is under their control, that your freedom is under their control, that your money is under their control. Here, Bonnie Henry in the past has tweeted out the same leftist themes, and this is from the World Bank. Many of the developing world's fastest growing cities are highly vulnerable to climate change. This goes back to 2013, 8 years ago. And in that report, they claimed that these vulnerable cities would be underwater today. That was their existential threat for humanity 8 years ago. It's the same people promoting this existential threat today as the pandemic. It's false. It's a power play. What climate change means for Africa, Asia, and the coast and the poor. Back in 2013, the World Bank. And here the highlights claim a new climate report looks at likely impacts of the present 2 and 4 degree warming across South Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia. It describes the likely risks of agriculture, the rise in sea level and devastation to coastal areas likely in Southeast Asia, and the fluctuating water resources in Asia. Turn Down the Heat warns that poor communities will be most vulnerable to climate change. None of this has come to pass again. Just like Al Gore's report, never came to pass. So, folks, that's all I have for today. And so, as you listen to the authorities wherever you live, have a skeptical eye. There is a massive power at play here. And your freedom is what's at stake. You shouldn't have to choose between freedom of speech, freedom of travel, and your safety. And you don't have to choose between that. As Florida and Texas have proven that their caseloads are as low or lower than the people with the jurisdictions with the tightest lockdowns. And yet they're doing fine. So, having said that, folks, thanks for joining me on Coffee with Steve. And as I like to remind you at the end of every show, do something you love to do today. Do it every day. And if you don't have something you love to do, find something you love to do and do it. Because this is your life. You have every right to enjoy it, no matter what is going on around you. So, with that said, I hope you join me next time on Coffee with Steve.